Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and welcome to another random review. Today's random review is Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead from 1995, directed by Gary Fleder, written by Scott Rosenberg, with an all-star cast. I'll have to read them out because I won't remember them all. Andy Garcia, Christopher Walken, Christopher Lloyd, William Forsythe, Bill Nunn, Treat Williams, Jack Warden, Steve Buscemi, Fairuza Balk, Gabrielle Anwar, Bill Cobbs, and a very small early role for Don Cheadle. There's a reverse or different artwork in this imprint release. Again, this is another film that had been on DVD for years, and imprint have released it in this wonderful edition with great extras, which I'll get to. Because this is a film that I already have had in my collection in DVD. It's a film that I like parts of and don't like other parts of. This came out in 95, the year after Pulp Fiction, and kind of got lumped in with the Tarantino rip-offs, even though Rosenberg wrote the script in 93. So that would be after Reservoir Dogs, but before Pulp Fiction. It was a script that kind of bounced around, and actors liked it because it was very wordy. And it eventually got made. People like Tony Scott really wanted to direct it, but Rosenberg and Fleder were kind of friends, and he promised Fleder to make the film, which was his debut. Fleder went on to make things like Kiss the Girls with Morgan Freeman, and Runaway Jury, and Homefront with Jason Statham. Rosenberg wrote High Fidelity and Con Air and Venom and the recent Jumanji remakes. And it's a film very much in the Tarantino rip-offs, even though it's not really. Like I say, I get lumped in together. It stars Andy Garcia as Jimmy the Saint. Everybody's got a nickname, so there's Jimmy the Saint, Garcia, Franchise, and William Forsythe, Easy Wind, Bill Nunn, the man with the plan, played by Christopher Walken, who originally was going to be James Caan, but allegedly Caan had to go into rehab, so Christopher Walken stepped in and is absolutely wonderful as always. He really is at his most reptilian and threatening. There's Critical Bill, played by Treat Williams, and this was a kind of comeback role for Treat Williams. Obviously he would make the wonderful Deep Rising a few years later, but this was kind of a comeback. And Mr. Shh, a hitman played by Steve Buscemi. So it's got an amazing cast. The script is very wordy. So as I say, Andy Garcia stars as Jimmy the Saint, because he did go to the seminary as a child or a young man, and he is a gangster who's made the clean break, and he's set up this company where people who are dying leave video tapes of them asking or answering questions, so that their loved ones, once they die, can watch the tapes to get advice, which is a nice idea. And again, this is a script full of nice ideas, but other things that probably shouldn't have been in there. It's 115 minutes long, and it should have been about 90 minutes, but we'll get to that. The film opens with a man climbing over a fence into a schoolyard, to try and grab a girl. And this man turns out to be Christopher Walken, the man with the plan's son, who has issues. And Christopher Walken brings in Andy Garcia because Andy Garcia owes money to somebody, but that marker is initially laid on Christopher Walken. So to get under from his debt, he promises to do one last piece of work, not an action, in which to scare his son's ex-girlfriend's fiance, so he never sees her again, so Christopher Walken's son can get back with the fiance. So Andy Garcia agrees to do this and gets a crew together, or the old crew, even though, again, I'm not sure how efficient the old crew is, because they're certainly not efficient in this job. Christopher Lloyd as Pieces, forgot his nickname, because he's got a degenerative disease that means he's losing toes. William Forsyth, Christopher Lloyd, Bill Nunn and Treat Williams. Bill Nunn and Treat Williams don't get on due to a story involving some things that Treat Williams may have done in prison. And obviously the plan to scare this guy goes wrong. People get killed, and Christopher Walken pretty much puts a hit out on the crew, and the film is about Andy Garcia trying to save them, trying to get them out of town, trying to save himself. It is a very noir concept. I do like the fatalism of it. Andy Garcia's character, it's one of his better performances, as he's trying to save not necessarily his friends, but people he certainly cares about, and they all take different routes at escaping or accepting their fate, as he kind of accepts their fate. So there's lots of good stuff in it. There's good performances. Again, I love the fatalism of it, but there is problems with the script. It tries to do too much. There's a romance with Gabrielle Anwar. The film's kind of set over like 3 days, but Rosenberg does say originally it was going to be set over weeks, so that romance would have been fleshed out. But again, like I say, it's already 115 minutes long. The thought of this being like 2.5 hours long or something, it just would be even less successful, I think. So that romance with Anwar feels compressed and feels crushed, and it doesn't really work. And then you have this subplot with Fairuza Balk, who's a local prostitute that Jimmy kind of keeps an eye out for. And at one stage she wants to have a kid and change her life, and Andy Garcia ends up having sex with her to give her a kid before he accepts his fate. And again, that just feels like the script's trying to do too much. It feels like one of those two should have been cut out. And again, the film should have been about 90 minutes, and it should have been a lean, mean fighting machine, instead of the 115 minutes that kind of is pushing in slightly different directions. The other issue I have with the script is Rosenberg has created some slang, stuff like boat drinks, give it a name, buckwheats, which is a terrible punishment, the most painful death, because it's shooting somebody up the posterior. So he creates this language, and we have veteran actor Jack Warden. The hub of the story is kind of around this malt shop owned by the wonderful Bill Cobb. Bill Cobbs. And Jack Warden is talking to people and essentially narrating and introducing the characters. So there's a kind of Greek chorus, which is kind of alright. But for these specific phrases that you can kind of work out what they mean, but the script has Jack Warden explaining what the phrases mean. You know, the Coen brothers did it masterfully in Miller's Crossing. They invented slang in this language, but they didn't have a character explaining what the words mean, because you figure out what the words mean. And again, these phrases, you can figure out what they kind of mean, but the script has Jack Warden essentially explaining to people who are just sitting in the booth, which are essentially the audience. I mean, Rosenberg at one point has a cameo as one of the people sitting listening to Jack Warden. So that is kind of annoying, the fact he invents this language, but then has somebody explaining to the audience what the language means. So that's a bit irritating as well. But again, there's a lot to like, but there's also some things that are a bit annoying. The edition by Imprint does have good extras, like I said. Things to Write in Denver When You're Dead, which is an interview with Rosenberg from 2022, in which he talks about before he wrote the script, his dad got sick with cancer and eventually died, and the script was really a way of him dealing with the grief from his father's death. So again, it's dealing with a certainty, dealing with, you know, these characters know they're going to die. Some of them accept it, some of them run, but generally they can't escape their fate. And again, the company that Andy Garcia has set up about people essentially leaving messages for their loved ones after they die, again, is an interesting little element, which is kind of intercut during the film, and it really pays off with Andy Garcia at the end because he leaves a message. So that's an interesting point made by Rosenberg, and again he talks about how the script originally was longer, it was set over a longer period of time, so that romance with Garcia and Anwar felt more natural over that period. But again, Fleder, I think quite rightly, kind of said we need to make it tighter. I mean, 115 minutes, it's not tight, but it's obviously tighter than what it was originally. And we need to have a kind of clicking talk, a ticking clock, even, not a clicking talk, because that's something completely different. Because at one point Christopher Walken gives Andy Garcia 48 hours to get out of town, essentially. So that's an interesting aspect. For me, I would either have cut the romance out completely and focused on his relationship with Fairuza Balk, or cut out Fairuza Balk's line and focus more on the romance. But for me, having both, it just doesn't really work. And then we've got Things to Direct in Denver When You're Dead. You can see what they've done here. And it's an interview with Gary Fleder, and obviously he talks about the Tarantino influence of Reservoir Dogs and this idea that you don't actually have to go to film school. You can just make a film, take it to Sundance or whatever. And he talks about Miramax and how the film just kind of got lost through the cracks. You know, when they previewed it, some people really liked it, other people absolutely hated it. And again, it is a mixed bag of a film. Then we have Things to Perform in Denver When You're Dead, an interview with Andy Garcia from 2022, which is wonderful. He has a fantastic anecdote about Christopher Walken, which is absolutely hilarious, about reading lines with him. Then we have Things to Design in Denver When You're Dead, an interview with production designer Nelson Coates from 2022. So it's a really good package, and again, if you watch the film in a vacuum, you may think like myself, oh, there's things I like in it, but there's also things I don't like in it. But these extras kind of give you a context, which again, the best extras always do, because as we know, the script that's written first draft is generally never what ends up on the screen. So we understand with the conversations with Rosenberg and Fleder how the film perhaps ended up the way it was. So again, another really good imprint release of a film that, as far as I'm aware, didn't have a Blu-ray elsewhere. It's by number 144. Again, it's a flawed film, but certainly if you're a fan of Christopher Walken like me, it's one of his best roles, even though he is really nasty in this one. But he is also quite wonderful, and it's got a great cast, because again, the actors were attracted by the material. It's a very wordy script, and all, as we know, actors really like to hear themselves talk. So even though they weren't paid a lot, it was because of that script. And even though it did, as I say, get kind of caught up as a Tarantino clone or a Tarantino rip-off, it was technically written before kind of Pulp Fiction really blew the doors off of that kind of type of film. So thanks so much for watching. Again, it's a film that's worth checking out despite its flaws. So please let me know if you've seen Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead and what you think of it. And hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Saul Ronan from Saul Ronan Films, saying farewell.